Okay, I am pleased to introduce the next speaker for our colloquium series on scents, Dr. Lubna Omar. Dr. Omar received her PhD in zooarchaeology at Kyoto University and is currently faculty in the Department of Anthropology at Binghamton University in New York. Her research and teaching interests broadly focus on the archaeology of human and animal relations, including complex societies in the Near East and the emergence of urban economies and subsistence resources in prehistoric and historical settlements. She has carried out fieldwork in Syria, Turkey, Jordan, and Japan. Still, her primary research focus is on northern Mesopotamia, aiming to reconstruct socioeconomic patterns of urban centers using analysis of animal remains. Her work also illustrates the development of urbanism in the region during the Bronze Age and later periods. In addition, she is currently expanding her skills by incorporating digital archiving and storytelling to document Syrian archaeologists' experiences as a tool to preserve endangered cultural heritage in Southwestern Asia. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Omar for her talk entitled "The Animals Behind the Bones: How Animals Influenced Human Culture in the East Mediterranean." Thank you.
Got my glasses. Something is missing. I can't see. Thank you, Myra, for the introduction, and thank you, Lauren, for inviting me to give this talk. When I first committed to come here and present to you my work on animal bones, I was not sure how I'm going to incorporate the concept of senses when it's come to introducing zooarchaeological analysis. So I guess what I'm briefly trying to say, this is my attempt to approach it. So animals and sensory experiences. I would like to start by stating, as a zooarchaeologist, for a long, long time, somehow I detached myself from the concept of looking at the bones fragments and reflecting on the actual animal they used to be. I think it's somehow, I don't know if it's the right analogy, but somehow similar to how, I guess, doctors feel about treating human body. I feel like you have to be in a different state of mind to count thousands of fragments and come with the statistical representation to see what it means in terms of subsistence strategies. However, in spite of that, I think it's a good point in our field, the field of zooarchaeology, to, I guess, change our ways, or at least change my own way. I'm not responsible to other people's views and opinions. And I feel like it's good to go back and reflect on the wider or broader image of how societies in the past used to interact with each other and with the animals that, were very valuable on multiple levels. Most, obvious one is the nutrition aspect and the diet aspect and how we relied on animals for our survival, starting from the evolution of our species. So in addition to their importance as a source of food or source of diet, animals provide us with a variety of food products and interact with us in variety, or we interact with them in a variety of ways, such as power, traction in farms and in agricultural settings, or even as our companion or pets. And I feel all these experiences could be assessed in a different way, behind the bones and what the bones mean, and try to reflect on, or not try to reflect, or try to deduce how was it to live in a Neolithic village in the East Mediterranean 7,000 years ago or 10,000 years ago, in terms of the senses we are trying to approach or look into from this in this talk. So I try to, this is just an introduction to what archaeology can provide us. What are the different directions we could take to our analysis of family remains. Sorry. as mentioned in my slides, we could even use animal remains or family analysis to learn more about the paleo-environment or paleoecology and reconstruct some of those changes in the landscape and environment and how it impacted human communities and human communities and societies. And mainly, and the focus usually, especially in the Near East region, is focused on subsistence strategy, how human exploited animals and in which way, and of course comes to mind the process of domestication, which started in that very small niche of the world, relatively speaking. So therefore, yeah, a lot of attention, a lot of research have been done on subsistence strategy, exploitation patterns of a variety of animals, whether they are wild or domestic, etc. And I would also add, in the recent years, there is more focus on the social aspects of human-animal interaction and human-animal relationship. As I mentioned before, it could be interpreted as, you know, the ties between dogs and cats and humans, which is like one of the earliest examples of choosing animals to be companions to us. In addition to that, we could go beyond the individual and talk more about belief systems and how animals played a vital role in sacrifice and offering and what does it mean and how. And I think it's a more, I don't want to say interesting, but I think it's a deeper look into ancient society when we try to understand how humans in the past felt about animal and what kind of relationship they were trying to maintain behind the meat and dairy and eggs and other products. So, all right, so I kind of like sat down and meditated on how I'm going to approach this topic, the sensory experiences and how we can deduce it through the use of family remains or family assemblages. And I came up with two categories. I thought we could definitely more obviously learn more about taste through exploring the variety of food and cooking processes, even butchering processes that we are able to see on animal remains, and then hopefully we could reconstruct a sensory image of how it might taste using definitely our modern repertoire of experiences with these ingredients. And in addition to that, I already mentioned in my slide, I already mentioned what I've written in my slide, different texture of food through a preparation and cooking method, how it impacts ultimately the taste and the experience of it. In addition to that, also I started to think about the smell of the prepared food, but in order to envision that part, I needed to incorporate more evidence. Obviously, if the bones doesn't tell me about the smell, but I think it's useful and beneficial definitely to incorporate other type of archaeological evidence, such as the architecture of the space. Where did they prepare the food? Where did they consume the food? How all these aspects will impact the sensory experience they will get. In addition to that, living in proximity to animals, something we don't think about in our urban modern setting, but maybe if we come out of it and imagine going back in time, maybe we'll have a sense of how does it smell to be living in a village in northern Mesopotamia. And ultimately, also I will try to highlight ritual and sacrifice practices and what kind of, I'm not talking, of course, about what it means in terms of belief system, but how the experiences might be relived through the evidence we have in our hand, archaeological evidence, animal bones, and other supplementary evidence. So these are, I'm like trying to prep you to what I'm trying to dive into. So I started looking into, I moved next to the usual archaeological methods we rely on to analyze and investigate animal remains preserved in archaeological sites. And I tried to look into each one of them and see how I could use this method or utilize it to highlight the senses I might be able to deduce from the method itself. The easier one, I will highlight a few of them. animal species identification, which is like the first task you would do when you approach the analysis of faunal remains, trying to look at bones fragments and separate them into, or identify them into species. So as you can imagine, we all have, we know what, or I don't know, most people know, when you're eating beef, you know the taste and the texture of it. When you're eating lamb, it's a different texture, different smell, different sensory experience. So if you're able to distinguish between a cattle or a sheep or a goat, maybe you will give you a hint of what had happened afterward at the site. In addition to that, also this is one of the biggest questions of zooarchaeological analysis in the Near East region for a long, long time, the attempt to distinguish between domestic and wild species. Again, as we all know, which is kind of easy for me to reflect on. I should have brought some meat, I guess, to sample. But wild animals will provide us with a different type, different texture of meat in comparison to domesticated ones. And lastly, quantify the most abundant species in terms of the bone numbers of weight. It's like a question of how much meat is consumed from certain animal versus another. So with this type of analysis, basically I'm saying that's what I'm able to get. The other interesting aspect, which is quite controversial, could be when you think about body part presentation. The basics of this type of analysis, as you can see from the picture, is you highlight what elements are finding from the body, and again we are of course connecting them to the meat associated with that skeletal element. This example from, I should have wrote it down, sorry. I demonstrate adult in dark gray, if I'm not wrong, and juvenile, younger sheep in gray color, and showing you what elements have been found. There's more of the front side of the animal rather than the hind limb or the back. So these issues could, maybe hint us toward what part of the meat has been consumed on the site. Marrow and fat extraction, I will talk more about it, but also it's associated with what bone we have and how it's fragmented and broken down. And again, coming back to ritual practices, because so many cultures and society, they were favoring certain element and even certain side of the element, certain side of the animal for their offering and sacrifice. Coming to sexual dimorphism, again, I don't know, honestly, I have been living in the state for 5 years, so I'm not sure to which extent this matters, but back home in the Middle East, it matters a lot if you're eating a female or a male, in terms of taste and flavor, and so many other issues. Therefore, if we could use the criteria, the sexual dimorphism analysis method into archaeology, maybe also would hint us to if there's a preference in terms of, female or male meat. And estimation of age, quite important for many reasons, which I should have mentioned here, but I just wanted to give a few examples, and I hope I will dive into it in other slides. Reflect the variation of the sensory quality of meat. Definitely, tender meat is connected to younger animals. And identify individuals contributing with other products such as dairy, which is a concept which kind of my whole career was all about. How old were the sheep and goat, and how long did they keep them? Did they keep them to produce dairy or just to produce other animals? And so all these questions come in play. This table over there displays what we call the optimal meat age based on modern breeds, but the number 12 to 36 months, it's from archaeological, assessing it based on archaeological material, when the meat of the sheep will be tender and good enough to be consumed, and after that age, the quality of meat will be stiff and not that, I guess, pleasurable to enjoy. So, So these are the time frame, the points in time I'm going to dive into. I know it's quite long, but I wanted to highlight different themes based on zooarchaeological analysis in the first place, and see how, especially in this very specific area, the Eastern Mediterranean or the Near East, the Middle East, whatever you want to refer to, how sensory experiences developed and changed through time, or I don't know, embellished through time. I don't know. I don't think change is the right term to do so. So I will highlight different themes starting from the Neolithic period, jumping to the Bronze Age, Classical period briefly, and end with medieval time, medieval periods, more specifically the early centuries of the medieval period. Okay, long time. So prehistoric census, it's a very fascinating topic, but I am usually fascinated with all kinds of things. Just to give you a sense of the location we are talking about, this is a map of Neolithic sites in Southwest Asia, and I have more experience, I have to say, with sites around the northeast of Syria. This is where I started my career in archaeology. I worked there for a couple of decades, or 1 decade, I guess. And however, I think it's wrong to kind of disconnect in what we call northern Levant from southern Levant. There are so many interactions that we know about from other types of archaeological evidence. So anyway, it's an introduction to say I'm going to start talking about the southern Levant. Oh, suddenly this mic is so loud. This example, I find it, I don't know, it is a reflection on our species, how sophisticated we were in so many ways, starting from a very, very early stage in time. We're talking about the late Epical-Neolithic period, and again, now in modern-day Israel, in the southern Levant region. The site is called Horizon Tahtid. In this site, which is interpreted by the archaeologists as a site for some sort of ritual and sacrifices taking place in this site, and so many enigmatic activities taking place. It's not the usual domestic activity that we will see in other Epical-Neolithic sites, or what we refer to as the Natufian culture in that part of the world. So in this example, two different structures have been exposed. One of them contained, as you see in the pictures, the remains of three wild cattle and 71 individual of tortoise. And think about it, we're talking about hunters and gatherers who stopped from hunting and gathering to collect all these animals and process them in a very elaborate way I guess also archaeologists hint that this person who is buried with all these animals reflects maybe a shaman or a woman on a higher level within the community socially, because also she had disability and she had someone taking care of her for many, many years. So it's a very interesting, unique example, and I mixed this up. Yeah, I should. Anyway, this slide shows you the different other animals which also have been incorporated in the burial or the structure which has been excavated. It seems like all the bones have been processed for meat and fat before they were buried, even the tortoise, but they tried to maintain the carcass intact, as you see in the picture. So just trying to imagine and think about this experience. Hunting wild cattle is the most dangerous thing you would do in that part of the world at this period of time. And they managed to hunt 3 of them. Most probably it was a huge, not most probably, it was a huge amount of meat. So you have to think also how they kept this meat from rotting and preserve it. So all these questions maybe help us to imagine or have like a sense of what they have been experiencing back there. And not to mention the connection they are having with the food and the person is part of a bigger ritual, reflect their belief system or what they wanted to accomplish with this series of practices at that site. All right. yeah, sorry, I should haven't skipped that image. Also, it shows you the cut marks which have been detected on the bones and what part of the animal. So they did have all parts of the animal there, and they didn't, bring only one piece of the wild cattle. They had elements from all parts of the body, which kind of matters because they did process all of it for meat. And now I'm jumping to a different, slightly different period of time, but we are still in this time in the Neolithic. This site, Abu Huraira, it has been excavated a long time ago, but the results from that site still extend until today on so many levels. And it's it had the earliest domesticated rye in terms of plant remains domestication process. And the inhabitant of this tiny village over there by the Euphrates, they had they introduced us to this settled way of life from the early Neolithic period, and it was an example we are still waiting to see in other areas around the East Mediterranean. So they inhabited the site for over 1,000 years, and then due to most probably the Younger Dryas episode, the conditions were harsh and they didn't have enough resources to sustain their lives, so most probably they went back to more nomadic life and came back to the site in another occupation phase. But I wanted to share with you the pictures of the huts, reconstructions of how their huts used to be. So in these huts, they processed a lot of barley and wheat and all kind of wild plants, And in addition to that, they hunted a lot of gazelles. Therefore, that map indicating to you the migration route of gazelles between modern-day Syria and Jordan. And they, of course, they had a magnificent knowledge of their landscape. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to survive. In addition to that, we have also what we call desert kites scattered all over the desert in these two regions. Many archaeologists and researchers hint that these structures were used to capture and conduct communal huntings of gazelles, which ultimately led to the extinction of the species from this part of the world. Therefore, I like to highlight put their pictures because they're rarely seen unless you're in the zoo I think in Qatar or Emirates. So as you see from the slide, they have been hunted with large quantities. So you think about it, okay, the whole village is coming together to hunt all these gazelles from different ages, different age groups, different sexes. So what were they doing with it? How they will preserve it? Because they are settled down, they need meat to continue their lives. So I keep imagining the pictures of all these huts, and I would say that most probably they didn't turn on fire inside of them because they are made of meat, but what do I know? However, other studies which have been done on gazelle remains from Jordan region indicated that most probably they used drying methods, maybe chopping the gazelle meat into tiny pieces, mix it with fat, therefore fat is very essential, and then trying to dry it or smoke it with fire, and that will add more taste and pleasure, I guess, in eating the dried meat. But definitely to preserve the meats of hundreds of gazelles, you have to find a way to preserve it throughout the winter. And unfortunately, this kind of analysis can't be done in Abu Huraira. It's underwater. It has been underwater for 30 years now. But luckily, other projects is trying to assess the role of gazelles and how it was exploited in the Neolithic period. And now I'm jumping again to a different site, Shatal Hiyuk, because it's kind of, I don't know how to describe Shatal Hiyuk. It's the example we all go back to because it has been excavated for a long period of time. As you see from this reconstruction of the houses or the household area in this site, the evidence is overwhelming in its richness and its details too. So the site was inhabited 7,400, 5,200 BCE. It's in central Anatolia. I'm sorry I failed to mention that. So it's a bit far from, it's quite far from the area of Abu Huraira and the other sites that we're talking about. However, I wanted to highlight two more things about this very specific settlement, because it's like, it's a large town, it's not a village. Thousands of people inhabited it, and it seemed that they had, in terms of food processing and the relationship with animals, they have a very unique, expressive relationship, if it's the right term, with animals, as you see from those pictures, and there are so many examples. Over here you have the horns of wild cattle embedded in the houses, or the spaces of the houses, and murals, bones, etc. So we don't know much about them, but on the other hand, we know a lot about them in so many ways in terms of the archaeological evidence we have. Anyway, so I just wanted to focus on the fact that they use plenty of animal products, meat obtained from domestic animals and wild animals at the same time. Also, they consumed eggs and waterfowl. In addition to that, all these activity that took place in these tiny, relatively tiny spaces, they also continued to maintain feast and ritualistic activity, most probably outside their houses, because we don't see a clear evidence of it inside the house, but doesn't mean that whatever they are doing in the house is not a part of ritual, but cannot pinpoint that. Anyway, so this is an image of what we call like a room or a house in Shetal Hayuk, and just to give you a sense of how small that space, and I will go back to this image over here showing you what sort of activity might have taken place on site. And just in case this picture was not clear enough, as you see, they didn't have many openings around the walls of their rooms. So just think about it. You have fire coming out of the ceiling, and with your household cooking a lot of stews, and during the winter. And imagine how this experience would be. I don't know if you would want to imagine that, but that's what happened in Shetal Hayuk. So when it's come to meat cooking activities, since I'm focusing more on animals, it seems like the zooarchaeologist Nerissa Russell indicated that they used most probably grilling, roasting, boiling, baking, and also they utilize a lot of clay bowls to bake the food. They heat it up and they use it in a variety of ways. It seemed like they didn't do a lot of roasting inside the houses, which kind of makes sense. There were a lot of stews and baking taking place in this Neolithic village. And also I want to highlight another aspect of Shetal Hayuk. Grease, extracting grease and fat was very essential to, as I mentioned, it's part of the drying process. It was incorporated in all kind of dishes. And the ultimate thing we have to think about is when you're slaughtering an animal, whether in the Neolithic or the medieval period, you have to consume it right away. It's not going to wait for you in the fridge. So these challenges, I think they are in the mind of our ancestor and ancient communities, and consuming grease and fat and extracting marrow is a reflection of it. We need to take as much food and nutrition out of these animals. And definitely it was reflected in the floors of Shetal Hayuk, because they were cleaning their floors often. And in addition to that, they were burying their ancestor under their houses, so they had to put layers and layers of plaster on top of each other. And in this process, bones have been preserved, and we know more about what was left on these floors, which is kind of fascinating, at least to me. Anyway, and now I'm jumping in time to the Bronze Age period, which is the area I spend more time investigating and looking at the bones from it. So this is the map, another map of more or less the same region, highlighting some of those big urban centers scattered in Mesopotamia and in the southern Levant, western, all over the Levant, and extending all the way to Turkey. So at this time we have written records telling us what people ate, how they interacted with animals. It's all about administrative how to say, records and administration reflected by the temples or the kings. They were making sure that they have everything under their charts. So we have all these lists of what animals were there and who owned them and where they are sending them. So we know a lot about how animals were treated back then. But we don't have many of the bones themselves because most of these written records came from areas in Iraq and Syria where archaeology started, you could say, and bones were like the last thing on their minds. So we know a lot from the text, but we don't know much about the bone. Therefore, I was interested in looking at the bones and see, does it match or it doesn't match at all? So in general, the main domestic animals in that region, which were the oil of their economy. I'd like to say how I look at it. It was the basis of the economy. So it's agricultural economy, but it's in an urban setting. They needed to have a huge amount of surplus and funnel it or channel it to the main sector, and then they distribute it to the larger community. So cattle, sheep, and goat were the main player. Also, they were kept as work animals, not only for meat, but also for dairy, hide, even dung, and other products. Still, gazelles have been hunted, but to a lesser extent in comparison to prehistoric times. For example, we have written text from Ur talking about issue of sheep for female weaver, most probably for a special occasion. Also, where fish were given to servants and other classes of the society. So they were still maintaining their life with whatever you could get, but there are other jobs you have to do, such as weaving or tilling the land. So another example, mutton, pork, fowl, fish, also they were included in the provisions of the king household, again from Ur, and other dairy products. So like the text is quite meticulous in terms of details and information. But again, we are talking about the upper classes of society. It's really rare to hear about the lower classes of society and what they were consuming and eating. So what did they do with all these resources? We do have texts with ancient recipes. Now we have like textbooks and YouTube videos showing you how they brew beer and baked bread, etc. But I wanted to show one example again from the text of Ur, the third period, talking about goats being roasted in the oven, and then sacrificial meat is a whole different story, how it was processed and how they wanted to please the gods. And also I wanted to indicate that it is still very common until this very day to eat all part of the animal. This is a very traditional and the usual common way to eat sheep and goat in the Middle East, which I really distaste, but missed my whole issue, my problem. So this example of traditional, the picture display traditional Iraqi dish called parsha, which kind of resemble in the way of preparing and the way the ingredient came together, the recipes and what they talked about in Ur dessert text. Jumping to another thing we could imagine, I guess I need to highlight this because I really don't like this dish. When you're preparing intestine and head and feet of sheep and goat, they stink so bad, and the whole smell will last in your house for days. So just to give you a sense of the sensory experience when you eat. But they keep telling me it's so delicious once you eat it. So yeah. Anyway, moving on to another issues I have with the dairy products in the Middle East. They quickly turn sour in hot climates. But they fed them to babies and they were part of ceremonial activities. Also, it has been consumed in the Neolithic period, and I didn't even have the chance to mention that. So they had to find ways to process it, create some kind of like buttermilk and dry it, and create some sort of instant milk when they need it. This is one example from Syria. It's a type of cheese called shenklish. Also, it's another way to ferment and dry cheese and preserve it for a long period of time. And again, we have textual, pictorial evidence from a variety of places talking all about how meat was, how the milking happened and what did they do with the milk. So I'm talking about now, still in the Bronze Age period, about the site which I did my PhD work on. Tel Bideri, again, is in the same triangle, northeast Syria. It had this unique, it is an agricultural town, not a village, but not as big as a whole city, somewhere in the middle. And they had all these structures and houses, and you wonder where the animals fit, where did they live, how they interacted with humans through, I guess, my attempt to use animal remains to reflect on that. So this is an image I took from the last time I was on a field work in Syria close to Raqqa, and this is just how the villagers in that part of the world kept their animals. It was within the courtyard of their house. So I don't know, I'm trying to think, maybe if you own a certain number of animals, you want to keep them in your household because this is the money you have, this is your currency. Another way I approach this is through the age stages of sheep, I think in this example, because it has two different levels, early Bronze Age and later Bronze Age. So different people lived on the site and they had a preference to certain meat cuts, or they were slaughtering animals in a certain age in comparison to other, for a variety of reasons which it's hard to pinpoint. But anyway, it seemed like in the early Bronze Age, they had more of the optimal meat age consumption, but in later Bronze Age, they were slaughtering animal in their 8th and 10th years, so very old individuals, and you could think about it, why they did that, and how did it taste? It's hard to know. The last point I want to, not the last point, one of the last points I want to highlight about the Bronze Age. We have a few examples from southern Levant. Southern Levant was connected to Egypt for a long time, so they embraced so many of the activity and practices of ancient Egyptians. One of them indicated in the study is favoring the forelimb rather than the hind leg. It differs from one animal to another. In pigs, it's better to eat the back than the front. It's all about how the animal moves and the texture of the muscles. But in the case of cattle, yeah, they were also for the cattle, it's better to eat the forelimb. They were sacrificing the forelimb, and this is an image showing you that how ancient Egyptians are extracting the front part of the animal, or the forelimbs. Another way to look at it is using statistical representation of how many bones do we have, and look at the chart, and as you see, there's more of the interior than the posterior, which is kind of like interesting how it tastes. And lastly, this last thing, I need to talk about pigs. They were not mentioned as much as the cattle and sheep were in written records, but however, the bone evidence show a different story, that pigs were highly consumed in multiple urban settings, even on a higher level, but more on the lower, what they call the lower cities of the lower cities of ancient Bronze Age communities. And maybe it gave the citizens of these cities a wiggle space to break from the administration and the government control of resources and just raise pigs and maintain them. However, other written records mention that, and also zooarchaeological evidence indicate that pigs were roaming around in the alleys of these houses and villages. So again, maybe it will give you a sense of the experience of, I don't know, having a herd of pigs going all over the place. Anyway, I have to jump to the classical period. Again, just another map showing you how large the Roman Empire were in the golden age of it. And just as an example from Turkey, the Roman side in the center of Turkey, and it focused more on the sacrifice part of animal-human relationship. I did have the chance to work on a Roman temple in Turkey, which kind of produced similar results. The gods didn't like pigs. The worshipper, they did like, they preferred what the gods seem to have kept clear preference for the right hind leg. So in Roman times, it's fascinating. There was a preference of right from left, but for the sake of this talk, it doesn't matter if you're eating right from left. They both should taste the same. You would imagine. Younger animal were present, certain age groups. So when you conduct a thorough study of zooarchaeological remains, you have like this information that you could use to have to reimagine the sensory experience. And speaking of it, I have a few gross pictures. I wanted to show the video, but I opted to the pictures. This is scenes from Rome, the HBO series. This is like when Lauren told me about the lecture series. This is the first image that came to mind. Sacrificing a cattle and being under it and being drenched in blood, that definitely would have an impact on what you're seeing, what you're feeling, what you're tasting, what you're smelling in ancient time. And definitely I cannot talk about the classical period without mentioning the very famous fish sauce, which was like a main component of Roman cuisine all over the Mediterranean. It's liquid driven from the maceration and liquefaction of whole fish with salt. And Claudio Gardiano is an Italian archaeologist trying to explain how it would taste. And the feeling of it has a taste of umami. In other places they mentioned that. And we could see sometimes the fish bones left from the sauce, and we could, recreate some of these recipes and hopefully the feeling of it. Lastly, the medieval cuisine. I couldn't find a funny thing to write about the medieval cuisine. This is the beginning of the golden era of Islam. I guess this is what they called it, the Abbasid Empire, spread in different directions in the East Mediterranean, Central Asia, up to Central Asia. And I was lucky enough to have the chance to work on medieval bones or Islamic bones from this aspect over here, just between the border between Abbasid Empire and the Byzantine Empire. So it was quite fascinating to look at it, but also I was interested in other time periods. And when I looked at the medieval period or the Abbasid period, definitely there were like mainly sheep and goats and cattle in numbers. I don't know about the pigs. I'm not the one going to say that the Abbasid were eating pigs. There could be so many reasons to explain that. However, I was interested in the traditions and the practices were taking place in that part of the world, especially between people from different regions, different religions, and how they interacted with the food. One fascinating aspect is, even though it doesn't look so appealing, fish bones. This is a list of fish which have been identified, not by me, by Professor Van Neer in Belgium, who spotted this fish, tilapia, which is not native to the area, and most probably it came either from the southern Levant region or even all the way from Egypt. So think about it. They had fish coming from 100 miles away. Definitely they dried it, they found a way to preserve it and keep it for a long time. So I love to go back to ancient cookbooks, especially the one I could read in Arabic. And this is a script, a piece of, or a quote from it, discussing how the fish was dried and how fast you should consume it and how far they could carry this type of food with them. So, as I mentioned before, once you have historical records and cookbooks and recipes, you can combine the evidence from zooarchaeological remain with the written record and other type of evidence and reimagine the sensory experience. As you can see from the picture, this is just one of those cookbooks talking about ancient recipes and how you could replicate it. So my conclusions are, animals are part of our sensory experiences and bones could directly or indirectly demonstrate this link. Animals throughout times were exploited by humans not only to nurture our body but also to play a vital role in refining our taste and palates. Funnel analysis could demonstrate how the memories of smells and tastes are associated with animals through food, labor, and social ties. And finally, the final record has its own limitation. I acknowledge that in investigating sensory experiences. However, integrating different lines of evidence could help us to learn more about it. And thank you so much. Not bad, just one time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Omar, for such a great talk. And now we'd like to take some questions, if anyone has any. Yes, Professor Moore.
Hi, I really, that was very quick, but I really appreciated how much material you pulled together. One thing that you didn't mention, and I'm wondering whether it is important in the regions where you're working. In the U.S., we spend a lot of time fussing about the food sources of animals as a way to choose between different animals: grass-fed beef, grain-fed beef, free-range chickens.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering whether you think that would ever be of importance in maybe pastoral systems or urban versus rural.
Yeah,
production?
it does, yeah, but because I was like putting all kinds of things together, yeah, it got lost in the talk. So, especially in the Bronze Age period, the economy was connected to those pastoral nomads who had the control over large flocks, and it's up to the relationship, how the relationship is maintained between the urban people and the ruler, and not the ruler, the nomadic groups, to, I guess, provide the food source represented by sheep and goat. In addition to that, those urban centers, they had a network of, or clusters of other sites, the rural ones, that would have, smaller sized herds, but ultimately they will also channel. So it's all about like the rural area, the nomads are the ones in control of these food resources, and they would find their way to the larger urban center. I don't know if I answered directly your question, but I guess, yeah, it's a different, the animals were all over the region. It was all about their numbers decreasing and maintaining the domesticated herds rather than where they came from exactly.
Do you think that a traditional person would have been able to perceive what they were eating? At that, we don't know.
Exactly, we don't know.
But do you think in today's world people say, that tastes like it was produced in the mountains, that tastes like it was produced on a field?
I think, yeah, they were like, from the textual evidence, again from bones, I cannot answer that, but from the textual evidence, there was a clear preference that I want a lamb from this age to be on my table as a king. So there was a preference of meat, of a certain age of animals and meat cuts. Like, I want this meat cut to be served to me. So, but so I guess the question would be, would you slaughter you cannot slaughter the animal in the village because it's still like a couple of kilometers away, so you have to bring the animal to alive and then process it on spot to have it fresh for the king, or the rich people, and then the lower class, I think it kind of either trickle down or they don't have meat. They have a lot of carbs and bread rather than a very healthy diet, especially in the Bronze Age, in comparison to the hunter and gatherers and Neolithic period of time when they had multiple resources. So yeah, I don't know. I wish we could know what they thought.
It seems like it would be an interesting study. I wonder if you could do it with looking at sort of isotopic signatures of the animal bones to sort of see, if they're like staying. I know it's hard, but they vary.
But they've done that, honestly, yeah, I just remembered, and she told me, they did the isotopic studies of the human remains, and they know what they ate, and the animals, how far they traveled. So it was not very far away animals, it was in the neighborhood of the settlement where they consumed most of their domesticated animals. Well, yeah, so they are doing such studies to connect the distance, the source of the food, where it's coming from, and how it's consumed.
Also, I think, now that there are some excavations on Southern Rock, all of the texts, there's like thousands of texts about animal processing at this site called Drea. Like tens of thousands of texts.
And I mean,
they have all kinds of distinctions of the type of sheep. I mean, I think we don't necessarily know always.
Yeah, they
what
all,
these mean.
yeah, thank you for mentioning. They had different breeds. They were what they call the fat-tailed sheep, more fat in it. So even like there's like, I want more fat in my meat. That was like one of the questions they were, or one of the quests they needed to acquire. So they maintain the whole breed, which provide more fat than other sheep breeds back then. Talking about 5,000 years ago, which is kind of fascinating too. Yeah.
Yeah, I think fat is very important. In the work that I do in another area where fat sources are much less abundant,
Yeah.
I feel that the fat flavor of meat probably was a critical distinction between body parts.
Exactly. Yeah.
And probably would have been considered to be a different food.
Yeah.
Not only were like the organ meats and stuff like that, different foods, but different parts of the body, a different food because of the way that the amount of melting fat in those cooked foods would have tasted.
Exactly.
So the fascination in this case would be the addition of dairy fats.
Yeah.
And the very strong smell that
Very
fermented dairy offers this whole world.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. The other thing that I mentioned here in my notes was the smell elements of different kinds of fodder. Not fodder, fuel.
Fuel. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
The wood versus dung kind of thing. I know people who really love the smell of dung burning and consider it to be the way that food should taste. So that's something that would connect with paleobotanist.
Yeah, exactly. I was looking into it and then I said it's more of the paleobotanist's word than my word. Even though
But it has to come together because
it doesn't
you can't
have
do raw meat.
But I think one of the things I was struggling with is like, how do you talk about smell? Because it's kind of, I don't know, it's about the person. I indicated I taste so many of these smells from my childhood time, but other people find it pleasing. So I'm like, how to describe smell? Or all I could say, there should be a smell, some sort of smell. And up to you if you want to enjoy it or say, I don't want to smell it ever again. Yeah, so again, one more thing we have to keep in mind, what we think that is delicious, it doesn't mean it's what other ancient community consider delicious, or you want to have it and it's pleasurable because we developed a different palate and taste for food. Same with the smell, what we might find, not pleasant, they might find that's the smell I want to live with. But the dung you ran off is very essential.
Okay, do we have any other questions? Yes?
You mentioned the sexual dimorphism in the Bronze Age in urban settings.
Yeah.
You might have, if you're keeping the animals for years, you might have neutering going on. Is there any way to determine the difference between a neutered and a non-neutered animal?
We usually rely on metrical analysis. You measure the bones and then you create some sort of charts and see where your bones fall, if they are in the middle between the females and the male in terms of size. So yeah, it is possible to have an estimation of it. But again, I go back to this question, and we keep thinking about slaughtering animals for meat, and I had a few very old females, and definitely they were kept for dairy and reproducing. My question is that I cannot answer, did they actually eat the meat? Most probably they ate the meat, it was very precious, but who ate the meat? That's another question to ask.
Well, it's kind of a trade-off, size-wise.
Yeah.
Because, pigs anyway, the reason for neutering a pig is because the meat is inedible of a non-neutered pig. So, what in terms of quantity, is there some way of determining when and why they would neuter?
When and why? They were neutered because it's similar to our societies today. You want to more tamed animals, someone to control, to do other kind of, duties around the farm, and you don't want the aggressive male, messing up your fields and destroy your houses. But it's really hard to connect. I would say from my work, it was really hard because also the site I worked on, it's another rescue site, and all the bones were packed in boxes, shipped to Germany, and kept there for 10 years. So it's really hard to connect the context. If you have a context where you see the bones and I understand where the bones are positioned, maybe you will have a sense of why they were positioned there. But if it's just about telling you, it's bones from a street, so it's really hard to understand the reasoning behind slaughtering such animals or keeping them longer. Yeah, I'm sorry, I couldn't clarify it in a different way. But it is an interesting aspect why they kept them and why they neutered them in the first place.
Great. Well, I think if there's no more questions, this was really fascinating. I haven't thought about any of these things before, so.
Do we have any more questions or no? Okay, well, great. Thank you guys all for